Today, we're just working through tragedy. I'll cut straight to it. I mean, it's something that I'm not sure what can be done with it. I'll start a petition. We'll try and get past it, but I need to acknowledge the elephant in the room, and that's that most Jeopardy contestants are actually smart. I mean, my entire last video was about how to get good at trivia, but guess what? Even if you do that, you'll probably still be amidst other people who are also good at trivia on Jeopardy. And that's just the reality. I mean, we can look at things that every contestant has passed the online test and everybody's gone through the same audition process. And once you get there, most Jeopardy contestants tend to know most answers to most questions. So just because you are good at trivia doesn't mean that you'll get money for the given clue. And it's something we're gonna get through together. And the way we're gonna do it is through buzzer strategy and final Jeopardy wagering, which I will discuss in this video. So let's break it down, starting with the buzzer. I mean, buzzer, I would argue, is more important than trivia chops once you make it onto the show. I mean, it's not rocket surgery. Everything you see on TV is real. I mean, it's an electronic thing. You press the button and you're in, right? There's some more layers here. And to appreciate the layers, we can talk about how, the buzzer started, where the clue would pop up on screen in early Jeopardy, and at any point after the clues popped up, somebody could ring in, their timer would start counting down, and then once the host is finished reading the clue, they could give the answer. And as you might guess, that kind of conflict of being able to buzz in before you're actually able to verbalize the answer, i.e. buzzing in before the question is read, causes some problems with talking over each other and pacing, and it can really mess things up. And so today, the way that it works, very specific steps, is that a contestant will call a clue, a category and a dollar amount. And then the host will read the clue, and then after the host says the last syllable of the clue, an offstage board operator will activate the signaling systems, and two strips of lights that are visible to the contestants but not visible to the viewing audience will illuminate on the side of the board, indicating that the signaling system is open. Then you can buzz in. So, of course, given that most contestants know most of the answers, the person who's gonna get the money for it is the one who can buzz in first. And it seems really straightforward, but there's something you have to decide. Here, you can either react to the lights illuminating on the side of the board, or you can try and react to the last syllable that the host pronounces. There's a bunch of debate on the issue, and for example, Ken Jennings, super champion and the host starting this week on Jeopardy, says that you have to be listening to the last syllable of the host in order to buzz in first. If you wait until the offstage person activates the signaling system, your eyes have to perceive the light, which sends a signal to your brain, back to your arm muscle to buzz in, and to that go all the way back to the signaling system, and all that is dead time for your opponents to ring in. Whereas if you're listening to the last syllable of the clue that's being read, you can try and essentially simultaneously ring in with the offstage board game director. That's the fastest way to do it. But I personally disagree, because the last syllable, even if you're like a native English speaker, can be really risky to predict. And we'll just take the word like insect, for example. I mean, if I'm talking to you about an insect, it's an insect, it's, duh. But if we have like Jeopardy host levels of enunciation and pronunciation, insect can quickly become insect or insect at the end of the word. And the difference between insect and insect can be just enough to shut you out there, because if you buzz in too early, you're actually locked out before you can ring in again. So it's really tricky. You have to sort of pick your stimuli, hope that you're the fastest, and get in there. And the best way to practice is to just watch Jeopardy. Stand up, grab something in your house. Now, I know before in the audition video, we talked about all using a clicky pen in your final video audition. But for real practice, my product of choice is one of these nifty toilet paper holders. I mean, not the cardboard, like the metal, springy bit that you have, because this is very similar in weight and dimensions, and with most springs, the resistance to an actual Jeopardy buzzer. So grab one of these around your house, and I emphasize stand up. Try and recreate the situation as much as possible and buzz in as close as you can to the last syllable. And make sure, more tips when you're buzzing in. They tell you to not just buzz once, but keep on pressing it over and over again, because in the situation where everybody will buzz in early and everybody's locked out, it could be that fourth or fifth press that actually gets your podium illuminated. Other thing, let's talk about posture a little bit here. So ever since Jane Holzhauer played, you'll notice that hands are just not visible. They're just dropped behind the podium. And you can see contestants occasionally when they play and they get frustrated, their arm just keeps going higher or out or all over the place. And you've got to control this and not just start Statue of Libertying. It's not efficient because when your arm's outstretched, you need to do all this motion potentially in order to get the buzzer button down, and you don't have time for that in these split-second decisions. So what a lot of, I guess, current champions are doing, and what you'll see more and more often on Jeopardy, is that players will take one hand, grab their wrist, and then drop the whole thing below. So you're just making these really minuscule movements, restricting any motion as much as you can. Not to mention that that's just a little bit more of a relaxing stance on Jeopardy. So those are my 2 cents, I guess, on minimizing reaction time. I don't know, practice with standing on one leg or holding your breath or shooting an EpiPen into yourself. Like, you know, whatever is gonna make your reaction time faster, go ahead and figure it out. And that's it. I mean, again, not complex, but still critically important and worth practicing. Now, the other component of this, even if you buzz in perfectly, unless you're so good at that you can get to the end every single time in Jeopardy, where you have at least double of the second place person's score, you really need to worry about final wagering. Now, unlike buzzing in, this is not physiological at all. This is something that can be like careful and calculated, and this is rare in Jeopardy, but really controlled and prepared for ahead of time. So I'm gonna jump into this little series. We're gonna go to the chalkboard and I'm going to quickly run through how not to wager bad 101.
And I recommend following 3 rules in this order. Rule number 1, if you get the answer right in Final Jeopardy, you wanna be able to secure the win or come as close as possible. Rule number 2, if you get the answer wrong, you need to minimize your losses. Rule number 3 is cover $0 bets. So these are actually rules or steps that you can follow mathematically to calculate the best wager. So we're going to talk about a scenario just with 2 players where player A has 10,000 going into Final Jeopardy and player B has 7,800. We're going to stick with 2. I'll explain how to loop in the 3rd player into your calculations later on. But let's just work through these 3 rules I talked about for this scenario. So step 1, player A needs to bet to secure victory. Since they're leading going into it, they want to make sure that if they get it right, they keep their lead. So first they need to figure out what B would wager if they bet everything, which is 15,600, and make sure they cover that. So the difference between 15,600 and 10,000 is 5,600. That should be player A's minimum wager. And now you might say, hold up, shouldn't it actually be 5,601? To which I personally say no, not 5,601. 5,601, a bet might lead to an immediate loss in scenarios where both players A and players B are incorrect. Whereas if they bet 5,600, they're saving themselves in case of a wrong answer. Once A wagers a minimum of 5,600, player B needs to bet to minimize their loss in case they both get it wrong. So let's say that A decides to wager 5,600 and they get it wrong, they would be left with $4,400. Now B just needs to calculate the difference between their score and that. 7,800 minus 4,400 is 3,400. So in that case, the maximum that B should wager is 3,400, and this simplifies to 3B minus 2A. Little stipulation here, you might calculate that 3B minus 2A is negative, which it could be, for example, if B had 6,000. And in this case, 3B minus 2A would be negative 2,000. So before I talked about B having to wager a maximum, and now since 3B minus 2A is negative, that's gonna turn into a minimum bound on B's score. So B should wager no less than 2,000. Third step here is they need to cover $0 bets. And we're gonna go back to our original scenario of 10,000 and 7,800. So the difference between those 2 scores is 2,200. Let's look at player A right now. That means if B bets nothing in order to cover a $0 bet, A should wager no more than $2,200. An important part in following these 3 steps is to make sure it doesn't violate any previous calculated minimums or maximums. That previous rule should take precedent over this 3rd rule, and we can just kind of throw this out. If we look at player B though, we'll notice that for them to handle the difference of 2,200, in case A bets nothing and B gets it right, they should wager at least 2,200. Now this is compatible with the previous maximum that we already calculated in a previous rule. So we're gonna keep this rule. This rule's good. So what we established in here is that A should do a minimum of 5,600 and B should do somewhere between 2,200 and 3,400. Now, if there's a third player that comes into play, all you do is just pick any 2 players and work through these same 3 steps at a time. So take A and B, A and U, and B and U, and run through those 3 steps in each of those pairings. When you do that, just follow those 3 rules, and then make sure you're always revising or updating violated minimums and maximums. You can kind of work through this yourself. I won't get into all the math. There are some fabulous videos on YouTube that will get into the math, but see if you can come up with the proposed wagers of $5,600, be $2,400 to $3,400, and $700 would be statistically the best wagers that these players could make. But as you might have guessed, there are a few scenarios where this math just doesn't check out, and I'm going to call these some special scenarios. How not to wager bad 102 and breeze through these. Stratton's dilemma is where if the minimum wager B to cover U's doubled score exceeds their maximum wager to cover A's miss, B must correctly predict whether a triple stumper is more likely than just A answering incorrectly and wager appropriately. 4/5 rule is where if B has more than 4/5 of A's score, their minimum wager shouldn't be A minus B like we established before, but instead 2A minus 2B. Prisoner's dilemma, if A and B have the same score going into Final Jeopardy and A has more than twice of U's score, A and B should predict whether their opponent will bet everything or nothing and try to do the same as them. We've also got the tortoise and the hare, so if A and B have the same score and A has less than double U's score, A and B should bet everything, but C should bet enough to cover an erroneous $0 bet by A and B. And finally, we've got the faith-love scenario, which is where if A has twice the difference between B and U's score, A should bet $0 and aim for a tie. It gets a lot more complex than that, but if you follow these rules from 101 and 102, you can get pretty far.
Ultimately, my goal was just not to lose sleep over a preventable mistake that, I easily could have studied. I wanted to get these basics down. But the question I have for you is, do you think I was actually able to do that? Or did the handsomeness of Ken Jennings, cause me to not be able to do basic arithmetic? Or maybe I was so good going into Final Jeopardy that I had 5 times the second place score and I could just wager my dog's birthday and rake in cash. To get the answer to that, you're gonna need to tune in Wednesday, January 13th, where you can watch me on Jeopardy.